Welcome to British Focus, where we break down the most important events shaping Britain's role on the world stage. Today, we delve into one of the most humiliating diplomatic setbacks a British leader has faced in recent memory. Keir Starmer, the man who aspires to lead the UK into a new era of global influence, has just suffered a crushing rejection on the world stage, one that exposes his lack of relevance in the most pressing international crisis of our time, the war in Ukraine. Before we get into the details, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on the latest developments. Join our growing community and be part of the conversation. Now, let's dive into this diplomatic disaster. Keir Starmer's attempt to position himself as a key player in the Ukraine crisis has backfired spectacularly. In what can only be described as a brutal snub, Russia has outright dismissed his proposal for NATO peacekeeping troops in Ukraine, exposing just how little influence he actually holds on the international stage. The rejection came during a high-stakes press conference, where Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov made it crystal clear that any foreign troops, even under NATO, EU, or national flags, would be seen as a provocation by Moscow. This was not just a denial, it was a direct humiliation. Starmer's idea was dead on arrival, crushed under the weight of global realpolitik. The timing of this rejection could not have been worse for Starmer. While he was pushing for British involvement, the United States and Russia had already agreed to restore full diplomatic ties and move forward with peace talks, a dramatic shift in international policy spearheaded by none other than Donald Trump. The reality is stark. The diplomatic landscape has changed, and Starmer has been left behind. Under the previous administration, the Biden White House had insisted that Ukraine must be at the table for any negotiations. But Trump has discarded that stance completely. Not only has Ukraine been shut out of key discussions, but European leaders, including Starmer and the UK, have been completely ignored. Nowhere was this more evident than in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, where a crucial high-level meeting took place. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio met with Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov, laying the groundwork for a potential peace deal in Ukraine. This was a moment of immense geopolitical importance, a shift that could define the future of European security. Yet, Starmer was nowhere to be seen. He wasn't invited. The UK wasn't included. The EU wasn't even consulted. Instead, Washington made its position clear: the era of transatlantic security guarantees is coming to an end unless Europe steps up. This is a nightmare scenario for European leaders like Emmanuel Macron and Olaf Scholz, who scrambled to keep NATO relevant in the discussion. But for Keir Starmer, it is even worse. Why? Because he staked his credibility on the idea that the UK should play a leading role in post-war security guarantees for Ukraine. He even suggested that British troops be involved in policing a ceasefire, a proposal that was met with immediate and public rejection by Russia. Lavrov did not mince words. The appearance of armed forces from NATO countries under a false flag, under the flag of the European Union, or under national flags does not change anything. This is unacceptable to us. In other words, Starmer's grand plan was an absolute failure before it even began. His attempts to insert himself into the conversation fell flat. He tried to position Britain as a key decision-maker, only to be brushed aside as irrelevant. The world has moved on, and he has been left standing on the sidelines. Meanwhile, this marks a total transformation in how the United States is handling the Ukraine war. Trump's decision to reopen diplomatic channels with Russia is a sharp departure from the hardline stance of the Biden administration and European leaders. Marco Rubio confirmed that the first step in this process will be to fully staff embassies in Washington and Moscow, something that has been off the table since Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine. This development is a severe blow to European leaders, who have spent years pushing for aggressive policies against Russia. For Starmer, it is nothing short of a catastrophe. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky now finds himself in an impossible position. Starmer's plan was completely rejected, and Ukraine itself was excluded from the Saudi talks entirely. Zelensky, currently visiting Turkey, made it clear that Ukraine will not recognize any deal that does not include them in the process. He reiterated his demand for a full return to Ukraine's 2014 borders, insisting that no matter how difficult, the East is ours, Crimea is ours. But the harsh reality is that Zelensky may not have a choice. If the US and Russia move forward with peace talks without him, Ukraine will be forced to either accept a deal on Trump's terms or face being left to fight alone, without Western support. And where does that leave Keir Starmer? On the sidelines. Powerless. Exposed. While major diplomatic progress is being made in Saudi Arabia, European leaders are left scrambling in Paris, trying to figure out their next move. The message from Washington is clear: step up, or be left behind. For leaders like Macron and Scholz, this is a crisis. But for Keir Starmer, it is an even bigger humiliation. He had built his foreign policy strategy around the idea that Britain must take a leading role in global security. He believed the UK could dictate terms in a post-war Ukraine. He wanted to be seen as a global statesman. Instead, he was ignored. He wasn't invited to the talks. He proposed NATO involvement. Russia said no. He wanted the UK to lead. The world moved on without him. This is a humiliating moment for Starmer, a stark reminder of just how little influence he actually holds. The Riyadh talks signal the dawn of a new era of diplomacy under Trump. One where Europe, and particularly the UK under Starmer, has been sidelined. While the US and Russia shake hands and discuss the next steps for Ukraine, Starmer is left watching from afar, rejected, ignored, and utterly powerless. So, what do you think? Is Keir Starmer completely out of his depth on foreign policy? Will Trump's direct diplomacy with Russia bring an end to the war? And what does this mean for Europe's role in global security moving forward? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you haven't already, make sure to like this video and subscribe for all the latest updates. Keir Starmer has once again proven what many have long suspected: he is completely irrelevant on the world stage. While he postures and makes empty declarations, real diplomacy is happening without him. The United States, under Trump, has taken a bold and decisive step, reopening diplomatic channels with Russia and setting the stage for direct peace talks. And what has Starmer contributed to this major geopolitical shift? Absolutely nothing. Let's not sugarcoat it. This is a humiliating moment for Starmer. He has spent years trying to craft an image of himself as a statesman, a leader who could restore Britain's influence in global affairs. But the reality? He's been completely sidelined. While world leaders are negotiating in Riyadh, Starmer has no seat at the table, no influence, and no strategy. Instead of shaping the future of European security, he is left scrambling for relevance, watching from the sidelines as real power brokers make the decisions. Trump's approach marks a dramatic departure from the policies of the Biden administration and European leaders, and it is exposing just how weak and ineffective the likes of Starmer really are. The first step? Restoring full diplomatic missions between Washington and Moscow. This is not just a symbolic move, it is a clear signal that the United States and Russia are preparing for serious negotiations, with or without Europe's approval. Marco Rubio, the new Secretary of State, has confirmed that the first priority is re-establishing embassies in both capitals, something that had been completely off the table since Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine. And where does this leave Starmer? Completely powerless. His entire foreign policy vision, if you can even call it that, has collapsed before his eyes. He clung to the outdated notion that Europe and NATO should dictate terms to Russia, that the UK should play a central role in post-war security arrangements. But the world has moved on. America has shifted gears, making it abundantly clear that it will engage directly with Russia on its own terms, leaving European leaders, and Starmer in particular, utterly sidelined. And let's talk about Ukraine, because here, too, Starmer's failure is glaring. While he has been parroting the same tired talking points about standing with Ukraine, the reality is that Ukraine has been completely excluded from these peace talks. Zelensky, currently in Turkey, has made it clear that his government will not accept any deal that does not include a full restoration of Ukraine's 2014 borders. That's a nice sentiment, but let's be honest, it doesn't matter. Why? Because Ukraine is no longer in control of its own fate. The moment Washington and Moscow agreed to negotiate directly, Zelensky's position weakened dramatically. He can make all the demands he wants, but if the US and Russia reach an agreement, he will have no choice but to accept it. And this is the brutal truth: Ukraine cannot sustain this war without Western support. If Trump decides that peace means compromising with Russia, Zelensky will have to comply, or face the devastating reality of fighting alone. And yet, Starmer still doesn't get it. He still imagines that the UK is in some position of leverage, that Britain can somehow dictate the terms of post-war security. It's laughable. He staked his credibility on the idea that Britain should play a leading role, even suggesting that British troops should be involved in policing a ceasefire. And what happened? Russia rejected the idea outright, dismissing it as completely unacceptable. This is not just a setback, it is a complete and utter humiliation. Starmer tried to inject himself into a conversation where he was not wanted, not needed, and not even considered relevant. He miscalculated the shifting dynamics of global power and, in doing so, exposed just how out of touch he really is. Meanwhile, as serious diplomacy unfolds, European leaders are running around in circles, desperately trying to remain relevant. In Paris, Macron and Scholz are scrambling, trying to come up with a plan to keep NATO and the EU in the discussion. But the message from Washington is crystal clear: Europe is no longer the priority. Trump has no interest in maintaining the traditional transatlantic security framework if Europe doesn't pull its weight. This is a wake-up call, a reminder that American leadership will no longer babysit European complacency. And for Starmer, this is a nightmare scenario. Because let's be honest, what does Starmer have to offer? His foreign policy is built on outdated assumptions and empty rhetoric. He talks big about Britain taking the lead, but the truth is, Britain under Starmer has no seat at the table, no influence, and no ability to shape the outcome. And this is where we see the full scale of his irrelevance. He wasn't invited to the talks in Riyadh. He pushed for NATO's involvement. Russia said no. He wanted the UK to lead. The world moved on without him. Starmer has been exposed. He is not a leader, not a strategist, not a statesman. He is a spectator, watching from the sidelines as real power players decide the future of global security. This isn't just a loss, it is a defining moment of failure. Starmer has been completely rejected by the very powers he hoped to influence. So, where does that leave Britain? If Starmer truly believes that this is the future of UK foreign policy, being ignored, sidelined, and humiliated on the global stage, then he is more delusional than we thought. What do you think? Has Starmer just proven that he is completely out of his depth? Will Trump's direct diplomacy with Russia bring an end to the war? And what does this mean for Britain's role in global affairs moving forward? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you haven't already, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more updates.